We want to check in, make sure that everyone is connected. You can see and hear if needed. If you need to see the interpreter who's speaking English, please do let me know in the chat. In the meantime, welcome. I'm glad you're here today. Before we get started, we want to go over a little bit of housekeeping and logistics. This presentation is in ASL with spoken English interpreters. The interpreters are off screen. We also have it captioned. You can view the captions by either using the closed caption button here in Zoom, or in the chat box, we will share a link. You can click that link and see the captions in a separate window if you prefer. For best viewing, we recommend you use a laptop or a desktop computer. A phone or personal tablet will be very limited in terms of being able to see the presentation through Zoom. We want you to participate in the polls, in chat. We will close the chat at certain times. And then we will also open the chat when we ask for feedback. In the meantime, the chat will have announcements and other bits of information. Toward the end of this presentation, we will have a poll that we will ask you to answer. And then we will have a Q&A time for questions and answers. And then we'll give you a badge of completion when you are finished with this. We are a federally funded center from the Department of Education and the Office of Special Education Programs. This webinar does not reflect the views of those entities. Any name that we mention is also not advocated by any of those entities. So with that said, I'm really happy that you're here today. We want to create a space for students to be able to talk about this topic. And before we go any further, my name is Kate Lewandowski. I am a female with shoulder-length light brown hair. I have a dark background behind me, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm the Access Resource Coordinator here at NDC, and I'm so happy you're with us today. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. It's the next slide down from here. We're going to look at the agenda, today's lineup. Okay, there we go. This gives you an idea of today's agenda. NDC, our entire goal is to provide information, networks, and strategies that dismantle barriers that deaf students face in post-secondary education. We work with disability service professionals, faculty, and staff, and most importantly, you, deaf students. Over the years, we've noticed deaf students contacting our help team about serious concerns regarding access in your schools and programs, and you often question how to get the institution to listen to you and resolve your concerns about access. Many students are not aware that you even have the option to file a formal complaint. A formal complaint is also called a grievance. And so you can actually file a grievance about your access experience. And in some situations, filing a complaint can be a powerful tool in resolving those concerns to get the accommodations you need. You know, in an ideal world, you make the accommodation, the school provides it, and everyone has access. But life doesn't always happen that way, right? So in this webinar, we'll take you through the essential advocacy strategies for requesting access, when to recognize when the situation isn't working, and how to start the grievance process. And finally, what to do if the access barriers aren't resolved. Next slide. All right. Before we dive into our topic today, I want to see how you're feeling about access on your campus. Do you feel like you have reliable, consistent, and quality access in and out of the classroom? You can share your reactions using the reaction buttons below. The clapping hands mean yes, you feel really good about the experience you're having. Access has been great. A thumbs up means you're feeling okay about it. It may not be the best, smoothest experience, but overall it's all right. A heart means things could be better. I see a lot of thumbs up. So that means, a lot of you feel like it's okay. I see a heart, meaning it's not always great. I see an applause, so that's a good thing. Okay, first of all, thank you for sharing how you feel about your campus access. Ooh, okay. I'm seeing that. I will have uh I will have you know that during this session we'll share more about some advocacy strategies for you who are showing the heart reaction. Next slide. Every year, we collect data to get a pulse on the current climate and trends in the college environment. This information directly impacts the work that we do, and we share this information to support and improve equity and access for deaf students. Now, what you see on the screen are comments that are shared by your peers, other deaf students who are currently enrolled in college. Students are telling us how they feel about their campus experiences, whether or not they feel valued on their campus or the experience is equitable. According to the responses we received, 54% of deaf students say they don't feel welcome participating in student activities on campus. Wow. 57% of deaf students said that faculty are not likely to provide them with notes or slides before class. And 53% of disability services do not collect formal feedback on the accommodations they're providing. This data is significant. We see there is a lot of room for improvement. The good news for you is that change is possible. So, we are going to share with you some strategies on how you can advocate for improvement on your campus. Those of you who have already completed this survey, thank you. If you have not completed this survey, please consider sharing your experiences with us. We will post the link in the chat. Next slide. Okay, now, we know sometimes things aren't always where they should be regarding access. So let's do another quick poll to see how you are feeling about advocating for your access. Again, using those reaction buttons. I want you to clap, use the clap hands if you feel like you know what to do if your access needs aren't being met. The thumbs up is for kinda, I'll figure it out. And the heart means you have no clue. I'm seeing a primarily thumbs up that you kind of feel like it's okay. You kind of know what to do, but you're not sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing your feedback. Let's look at the next slide to talk a little bit more about the strategies we recommend you use. So, before we think about campus access, let's focus on the first step of ensuring that you have equal access on campus, and that's by using your advocacy strategies. In the next few slides, I'm going to cover the essentials you need to know. So let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. All right, often advocacy skills are essential in challenging situations. So let's take a look at a scenario that we sometimes see from students navigating access challenges on their campus. Meet Emily. She is a freshman student at a private university who requested sign language interpreters for her classes. The Disability Services Office said they don't have any interpreters, but they're willing to provide CART. CART is the real-time text transcript that can be read on a laptop. What would you do in this situation? Should Emily give CART services a try for her classes, even though she's not really sure CART will work well for her? Or should Emily meet with the Disability Services Office to explain that interpreting is most effective for her and shares examples of why that works well for her? Or C, Emily could do nothing and hopefully the problem would go away. In the chat box, go ahead and type in what you think the best resolution for Emily might be. Okay, I see a lot of you answering B. I do see that you have some knowledge of advocacy already in your tool belt, and that is fantastic. Right, that Emily should go to the Disability Services Office and explain why it is what she's asking for, which is an interpreter, works well for her. When it comes to access and accommodations, you know what is best for what you need. And in the college environment, there is no handbook or guide on exactly what you should do or when. So when this type of situation comes up, it's important to carefully consider what options will provide you with the most effective access. It's important for you to think about what's most effective for you and then how you advocate for that access. Next slide. All right, as a deaf person, your right to equal access in post-secondary education is protected by federal law. Training programs, colleges, and universities are required by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, to make their campuses and services accessible. Section 504 is the first disability civil rights law in the United States, and it prohibits discrimination of qualified individuals with disabilities by entities that receive federal financial assistance. This applies to many public and private institutions. Likewise, the ADA is also a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. The ADA applies to all areas of public life. That includes employment, education, transportation, and all of the public and private places. ADA applies both to public and private universities. The ADA mandates that people with disabilities have effective access to programs and services in that institution. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that word effective actually means under the law. Next slide. Let's move to the next slide, please. Disability services offices are responsible to ensure that the accommodations provide effective communication access. Effective communication is an important part of the ADA. What it means is that communication for a person with a disability is the same and as effective as the communication for a person without a disability. So, effective communication means no barriers, no information is lost, and no misunderstandings are there. Clear, two-way communication is what that means. This applies to training programs, colleges, and universities. Those are the institutions we are referring to. It could be accommodations like sign language interpreters, speech to text services, captioned media, closed caption videos, assistive listening devices, and things such as that will ensure effective communication. An important part of what colleges are required when providing accommodations is to consider what the deaf student believes is effective for them and knows is effective for them. The student is the one who identifies the effective accommodation in order to get all of the information. That means that your statements, your self-report on the accommodations that are effective for you are critical. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by effective communication. As a scenario, let's say Mateo is asking for access to a real-time text transcript for his science class. The professor has an accent that is sometimes difficult for Mateo to understand. The professor speaks very quickly and uses a lot of technical terms, and the questions on the exam come directly from the lecture. When the Disability Services Office considers what is needed for effective communication, which means clear communication without barriers, the accommodation that will give Mateo the most effective access to his science class is speech to text services. And I often will just sign STTS for that. Speech to text services is provided by a trained professional with a commitment to providing consistent and accurate information in class. So they understand using speaker IDs, the correct spelling of key terms, punctuation, information about tone and affect. What would not provide effective communication is automatic speech recognition, or ASR. ASR applications are machine generated and the accuracy varies greatly. Words will be missing or completely wrong. Punctuation may be off and background sounds are not included. So again, we're looking at the word effective communication and what it is that provides effective communication. Next slide. An important part for you to know, oh, here we go. An important part for you to know is the interactive process. So I want you to remember the terms interactive process. The phrase interactive process is just a formal way to say that the Disability Services Office is obligated to go through a conversation with you when they make decisions about accommodations. That process always starts with you as the deaf student. It's your responsibility to communicate what it is you need and why you need it. Remember that as a student, you determine what communication is effective for you. In the next segment, it says the Disability Services Office decides what accommodation is reasonable. Well, what reasonable is will depend on the situation, what you identify as effective communication, and the course or the program objectives. In general, the interactive process should look like a back and forth process between you and the Disability Services Office. Sometimes faculty can be involved in that process as well. They're focusing on what is effective for you. Feedback and problem solving are very important for you and the Disability Services Office to determine together. Next slide. So looking at this slide, when you're requesting accommodations, there are a few things to remember we have outlined here. In that first box, explain your request and why it is you need it. Identify what accommodation it is you need, and then be proactive. Start that process early. Next, engage in the interactive process. Be a team player with the Disability Services Office. Work with them during the accommodations process, and then follow up with them if you have questions or concerns. If that office has concerns that they want to ask you about and they reach out to you, respond to their questions and share information about what works best for you. Finally, here it says give feedback about your accommodations, evaluate your access. If things are great, that is important for that office to know. If things aren't going very well, it's important that that office be aware of that right away. So you need to let them know. Next slide. Sometimes, whenever you go back and forth with the Disability Services Office and you share your concerns, you emphasize how things didn't go well, you clearly share how it could be addressed, but they're just not working with you. And there seems to be some type of breakdown in the communication. You've given them all the feedback, but still they're not providing what it is you need. What do you do next? It may be time to involve the Disability Services Director or even the campus ADA coordinator. Those people may need to be involved in helping resolve the issue. And you may can offer more clarity to them about the situation and get a timeline for a resolution. It could be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, but depending on that time frame, it's important to continue communicating with the Disability Services Office. If after that time you have reached out, you have attempted other ways, but there's still not a resolution and access is non-existent, it's time to file a complaint. Next slide. Now let's shift gears and focus on what to do when access breaks down. This may mean you need to file a formal complaint or grievance. So let's talk about how we do that when access is not happening or when it breaks down. Next slide. So here's another scenario. This is something we see come up in our office often. Let's just say there's a student named Ari who is a law student using remote speech to text services. For the past 3 weeks, those services have consistent problems. The professor is not wearing the microphone, and the remote captioner cannot hear them. Wi-Fi is not reliable, and the remote provider sometimes doesn't show up, or it's a different person every single class. The Disability Services Office is aware of the situation, but nothing has happened to resolve it. Ari is getting behind in classes and doesn't feel ready for the next exam. What should that student do? Take a minute to share your thoughts. What do you think would be the next step for this student? Feel free to type your response in the chat. One person said to meet with the professor. Yeah, maybe talk to the professor about what is happening. If you bring in faculty, sometimes they can help you advocate for what you need to the Disability Services Office. I see someone say file a formal complaint. It may be time to consider that. If access has been lacking for 2 or 3 weeks, it's certainly time to consider that. I see someone said meet with an advisor. That is an important approach. The more people who are aware of the situation, the more options or opportunities you have to find a resolution. Someone else here said contact IT about the Wi-Fi issue. Let them know that you're not getting reliable Wi-Fi in that room. Yes, these are all very good options, great things to think about. There's no one right answer. No, nothing here is wrong whatsoever. It really depends on your comfort level, what's happening on campus, and how you're able to function with the lack of access. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide while we finish up reading in the chat. It may be time to file a complaint in certain situations. Let's say you didn't get the accommodation you needed for effective communication, or maybe you got that accommodation, but it was not effective. Or you didn't get the accommodation in a timely manner. And the final thing here, it says the issue still hasn't been resolved, even after you've communicated your concerns. Like a situation with Ari, they tried to talk to the disability services person. So filing a complaint may be their best next step to reach a resolution. But how do you file a grievance or a formal complaint? Let's look at the next slide. Generally, as a deaf student, you have two options. Your first option is to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. They are connected with the U.S. Department of Education. Another option you have would be to file an internal grievance. That would be processed through your school, through your institution, college, or university. What choice you make depends on what's available and depends on what you feel needs to be done. You could also file both simultaneously. Let's look at the next slide. If you decide to file a grievance with the Office of Civil Rights, you can do that. Anyone can file a complaint. Any person or organization filing a complaint doesn't have to be the victim, but you can file based on something that's happened to someone else. First, here we see that the complaint generally must be filed within 180 days from the last act of discrimination. That means if there has been a situation arise and it's not being resolved, then you have 180 days from the last time you experienced that discrimination to make the complaint. Number 2 on the slide says, if you decide to go ahead and file a complaint and use that internal grievance process with your institution, and you're also going to file a grievance with OCR, it must be submitted to OCR within 60 days of completion of your institutional grievance. More information about that process of filing a formal complaint will be shared as a link in the chat. You can click on that and read through it later to get more information. Let's look at the next slide. Another option for filing a complaint is to go through a grievance process on campus. Many colleges and universities have information about this process on their websites so that when a problem arises or you experience a barrier to access or discrimination, you can walk through an internal grievance process. It may be housed on the Disability Services website, or you may need to do a Google search related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Maybe search out search terms like legal services or Office of Equity and Diversity. Some type of information should be available on your school's website so that you can find information about how to file a grievance. If there is no process or procedure that you can find at your school, you may want to consider going directly to the Office of Civil Rights. Next slide. If you are filing a complaint, it will be important to provide evidence of what it is that went wrong. This could include that you didn't receive an accommodation at all. And a few other things to consider to include are listed here, numbers 1 through 5. You first want to clearly state the problem. For example, you didn't get access you needed in class, and explain what happened and what process you went through. Number 2, you need to clearly state what needs to happen to solve the problem. Let's say in that instance of remote cart services not being effective, what needs to happen in order to resolve it? The Wi-Fi needs to be stronger. The faculty member needs to wear a microphone. The speech-to-text provider should be consistent week by week. So you explain what it would mean to you to have effective communication. Number 3, all records of emails and requests, paper documents, everything related to your situation needs to be shared. Anytime you sent or received an email from the Disability Services Office or faculty member, anyone else related to the situation, document all of those instances. Number 4, include a timeline of everything that happened. Start with when you first made the request, what information communication you received from the Disability Services Office. If the access wasn't timely, make sure you include those dates in a clear, concise timeline. Finally, include who all was involved in the situation. That could mean the Disability Services Office, who specifically within that office was involved in your situation. You may need to include your professor or your service provider, whether it's an interpreter or a speech-to-text provider. That will give a clear picture of what is happening in your situation. So name people by names. Next slide. Now, let's say all of this has happened. You have thought through those options to file a complaint. You know where to go find information about filing an internal grievance or with the Office for Civil Rights. Let's say you went ahead and filed a complaint, either place. What happens next? Next slide. This explains what happens after you have filed a complaint and what can possibly happen. Ideally, a resolution will be resolved, or you may need additional advocacy. And if not, you might consider a completely new direction. Whatever happens, we strongly hope that a resolution is reached. Now, that resolution can look different depending on what it is your issue is and what your grievance is about. Every situation will look very different. But we hope the outcome is a positive one for you and that your concerns are addressed and resolved. But unfortunately, we know that doesn't always happen. In that case, what should you do next? There are two different approaches when it comes to advocating for your rights. You can look for additional advocacy, and there are different approaches to do that. There are many organizations you can reach out to get additional support. You may want to consider having a legal advocate, especially during that grievance process. The National Disability Rights Network has organizations across the state, across different states, that provide support when it comes to advocacy and where you can find information about your state's disability rights organizations and information. The National Association of the Deaf is another resource you could consider. We'll be posting a link to the resources I mentioned in the chat. Thirdly, you may feel the need to go in a completely different direction and take a different approach. You may feel like the experience you've had with this grievance has been so disappointing to you that you decide to move into a different program, change your major, or even go to a different school. That's okay. Life takes us on different paths. Let's look at the next slide. So, we know that anytime you file a grievance, it's a difficult process. If you've arrived at that point, you have experienced something traumatic, and you are managing the impact of the harm that has been done to you. Because of that, we encourage you to lean on your networks for support, whether that be your community. We want you to seek out support so you can share your experience with professional mental health counselors, family, friends. There are also national options available for mental health, and we'll be sharing that in the chat. There are some mental health organizations that we've listed here on the slide, and we'll also add a link that you can reach out to. There is also disability organizations, wellness groups that you can reach out to. In the chat, we'll add two websites where it's like a clearinghouse where you can see all different types of counseling and therapies depending on your preferred affinity group. Next slide. All right. I also want to remind you that we here at NDC are here for you. Our website contains a host of resources that can help guide you through getting the access you are deserved in school. We have information about knowing your rights, accommodations, how to navigate different scenarios that may happen. Like, let's say you want to take a foreign language class, or you have an internship you would like to take advantage of. Our help team is here to support you through that. We can meet with you, talk through your situation, and give you some tips, strategies, and resources that can help you determine your next steps. With our website and our email address at hand, you can reach out to us anytime, and I'll post that here in the chat.